The United States is technically out of money. Again, the clock is ticking. Politicians are arguing. Markets are pretending to stay calm. And everyone knows exactly how this ends. Not with spending cuts, not with default, but with Congress raising the debt ceiling again. So here's the uncomfortable question hiding in plain sight. If the debt ceiling never actually stops spending, why does it exist at all? Right now, this matters because America is more indebted than at any point in its history. Over $34 trillion. That number is so large it barely feels real anymore. It's bigger than the entire US economy. Bigger than the economy of China, Japan, and Germany combined. And every few years, we perform the same ritual. Panic, negotiation, countdown, relief, repeat. To understand why this keeps happening, you have to forget the way the debt ceiling is usually explained. This isn't about fiscal discipline. It's not a hard limit, and it's definitely not a brake pedal. It's closer to a rearview mirror. The story starts during World War I. Before 1917, Congress approved borrowing every single time the government needed to issue debt. Each bond, each loan, individually. It was slow, it was messy, and during a war it was dangerous. So Congress did something that seemed practical. It created a legal cap on total debt. Not to stop borrowing, but to streamline it. As long as the Treasury stayed under the ceiling, it could borrow without asking permission every time. The debt ceiling was supposed to make spending easier, not harder. Fast forward a century, and that original purpose is mostly forgotten. What remains is a law that says the US government cannot borrow above a certain number. But here's the twist. Congress already approved the spending that requires the borrowing in the first place. That's the paradox at the heart of the system. Congress passes a budget. Congress authorizes spending. Congress cuts checks. Then later, Congress debates whether to pay for what it already bought. Imagine ordering dinner, eating the meal, and then arguing with yourself about whether to pay the bill. That's the debt ceiling debate. When the ceiling is hit, the government doesn't suddenly stop owing money. Social Security checks are still due. Military salaries are still owed. Interest on existing debt still accrues. The spending already happened. The only question is whether the Treasury is allowed to borrow to cover it. This is where the drama comes from. Once the ceiling is reached, the Treasury starts using what are politely called extraordinary measures. This is accounting gymnastics, shuffling funds, suspending investments, delaying payments within the government itself. It buys time, weeks, sometimes months, but it doesn't solve anything, because mathematically, there are only three options: raise taxes, cut spending immediately, or borrow. Raising taxes overnight doesn't work. Instant spending cuts would cause chaos. So borrowing is the only realistic option. And borrowing requires raising the ceiling. This is why the debt ceiling has never permanently stopped spending. Not once. Not in over 100 years. The US has raised or suspended it more than 100 times. Under presidents of both parties. During booms. During recessions. During wars. During peace. The ceiling isn't a lock. It's a recurring political test. Supporters say it forces discipline, that it creates a moment to debate deficits. Critics say it's a self-inflicted hostage crisis. Both are partly right, and both miss the deeper issue. The real driver of debt isn't the ceiling. It's the math underneath. America runs persistent deficits because its promises are larger than its revenues. Social Security, Medicare, defense, interest. These aren't abstract line items. They're legal obligations, and they grow automatically. As the population ages, costs rise. As interest rates rise, interest costs rise faster. And unlike a household, the government can't just decide to stop paying its past bills without consequences. Here's the irony. The debt ceiling debate feels like a fight about the future, but it's really a fight about the past. Every dollar in question has already been spent. Markets understand this. That's why they don't panic every time the ceiling is hit. Investors know that an actual default would be catastrophic. Not just for the US, but for the global financial system built on U.S. Treasury bonds as the safest asset on Earth. A true default wouldn't be a moral stand. It would be economic self-harm. So the ceiling always moves, which raises a more uncomfortable truth. The debt ceiling doesn't control spending. It controls narratives. It gives politicians a stage to signal responsibility without making structural changes. It creates headlines about restraint while deficits continue in the background. It turns long-term fiscal problems into short-term crises that can be postponed. And postponement has a cost. Every time the ceiling is raised, the debt gets larger. Every time it gets larger, interest payments take a bigger share of the budget. That money doesn't fund roads, research, or defense. It pays yesterday's bills. At some point, the question stops being whether America can borrow. It becomes how much borrowing crowds out everything else. This is where the hype diverges from reality. The hype says the debt ceiling is a safeguard. The reality is it's a symptom. The safeguard would be aligning spending with revenue over time. The ceiling doesn't do that. It just creates moments of brinkmanship that end the same way. Zoom out, and the risk isn't sudden collapse. It's gradual erosion, less flexibility, more of the budget locked into autopilot, fewer options when the next crisis hits. And there will be a next crisis. So why does the debt ceiling still exist? Because removing it would force a more honest conversation. One where budgets and borrowing are linked in real time. One where responsibility can't be delayed until the bill comes due. And that's a harder conversation than a countdown clock and a last-minute deal. The debt ceiling survives not because it works, but because it's familiar. It creates the illusion of control in a system that runs on political compromise and economic inertia.